Seches Chagiga Daf Chaf Hey comes right after the Mishnah, which taught us the halachos of trusting in Am Haaretz on the halachos of Truma and Kachim. And this is our first example of a case where Truma has stricter halachos than Kachim. The Gemara begins here. The Gemara will explain the language of the Mishnah, and the Gemara will ask a contradiction to the Mishnah. The Gemara will have a halachic shiloh based on the Mishnah, and the Gemara will try to use the Mishnah as a proof to a different subject. So, let's summarize what we've seen in the Mishnah. An Am Haaretz is trusted as far as Kachim are concerned to say that he kept them and he watched them b'tahara throughout the entire year. As far as Truma, though, he's only trusted to say that they are tahar during the pressing season. We're talking about wine and grape juice, grape juice and oil. In the pressing season, when it is first picked off the trees and pressed, right then we're assuming that if he says that he kept them tahar, they're tahar, and a kohen is allowed to accept it as truma tahara. After the pressing season, we do not trust them anymore. This is a situation in which truma is stricter than karbanos, than kachim, because you can use an Am Haaretz's wine and oil for kachim all year round, but you cannot use it for truma, you cannot accept it as truma, except for pressing season. So, the Gemara has a language problem on the Mishnah. The Mishnah said that this is true in Yehuda. So the Gemara wants to know what's the difference between Yehuda and the Galil. Why should there be any difference? Why is the Yehuda region any different than anything else? The Gemara answers that really there's no difference as far as the trustworthiness of the Am Haaretzim. The problem is as follows. There is a strip of land that belongs to the nations, it belongs to Kusim, between Galil and Yerushalayim. Therefore, any Kachim that you're going to bring from the Galil to Yerushalayim is going to have to pass through that strip of land. It has to cross it. And the halacha is that anything which crosses through land that belongs to the nations becomes tamei because they have graves all over the place. Therefore, those Kachim will never make it to the base of Mikdash to ever be brought as Kabbanos to become tamei on the way. And therefore, we cannot trust the Am Haaretzim kept it b'tahara because they can't bring it to the base of Mikdash anyway. So the halacha that the Mishnah says that Am Haaretzim are trusted to say that wine and oil is tahar all year round is not true if they're in the Galil because they can never bring it to the base of Mikdash b'tahara anyway. So Gemara asks, why don't they bring it in a shida tevo Mikdash, in a box, in a closed crate or a closet that prevents tumah from getting in? So the Gemara says that this brisa, this Mishnah is holding like the opinion of Rebbe, which says that a ohel, a room which moves, doesn't count as a room. So even if you have a container that's large enough to be considered a room, if it's being transported, it does not count as a room. So the interior of a car, a plane, would not count as a room, would not block tumah from getting in. And therefore when it passes over the graves, it becomes tamei, so that's not a solution. So Mara says, okay, well, I have a different solution. Why don't you put it in a sealed earthenware kli? We know that an earthenware kli cannot contract the tumah from its outer edge, and therefore if it's sealed, tumah can't get into it. So move it that way. So Gemara says this is the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, who says that an earthenware kli does not work to protect kodesh. It only works to protect other things, not kachim. Kachim become tamei even if they're in a sealed earthenware kli. Now the Gemara brings a brisa, which says that chatas, that's paraduma water, is not saved by a earthenware kli. So the Gemara says that would seem to imply that chatas water is not saved, but kachim water is saved. It's only chatas, which is the highest level of sensitivity to tumah that exists, that becomes tamei even if it's in a kli cheres. But kachim, wine and oil, that should be able to be saved by a kli cheres. The Gemara says, no, that's not the correct implication. The implication over there is only paraduma water can't be saved by kli cheres. Other water which is not yet sanctified as paraduma water, that could be saved by kli cheres. But any type of karbanos, any type of kachim cannot be saved by a kli cheres. So I think Gemara has a question. We have a statement of Ula that says that the Talmid Chachamim in the Galil set aside and they press wine and oil to use b'tahara. So what's the point? What do they do with b'tahara if they were never able to get it to the Beis HaMikdash anyway? Why are they watching it b'tahara? The answer is simply they're waiting for Eliyahu Navi to come and announce Mashiach. When Eliyahu Navi comes, he will purify that land, and they will be able to pass through that strip of land that belongs to the Kusim without being metame. Rashi says he'll do it by finding a path through it where there's no graves. Other Rishonim learn different explanations. Again, this concludes the Gemara's linguistic analysis of the Mishnah. Now the Gemara has a contradiction to our Mishnah. That's from a brisa that says that somebody who is harvesting his olives should leave a basket over. Now we're talking to an Am Haaretz who's harvesting, and it says he should leave a basket over to give it to a poor Kohen that he should have truma, and that Kohen should do the pressing himself. Because if the Amaretz will press it, the Kohen won't be able to accept it from him because it'll be Tamei Truma. So he should leave it over and let the Kohen do the pressing himself, so it shouldn't be Tamei Truma. So that contradicts our Mishnah. Our Mishnah said that during the pressing season, the Amaretz is trusted to say that it's B'tahara. Why does he have to leave it over for the Kohen to press? So my answer is, well, our Mishnah is referring to when it's early in the season, when it's olives that are picked early, they're ripe early and they're picked early, so it's still pressing season, and therefore it's trustworthy. Here we're talking about where it's late in the season. Most of the pressing season is already over by the time these olives are picked. Then you should leave it for the Kohen to press himself, because the Amaretz is no longer trusted because the season's over. And the Gemara offers a second answer. The Gemara wants to say, well, maybe our Mishnah, it was talking about Yehuda, we said. So maybe this brayso that says that the Amaratzim are not trusted is talking about Galil. It's talking about in the Galil area where we said they're not trusted. The Gemara says, no. We didn't say they're not trusted. We said that they can't get it to B'tahara from the Galil to Eretz, to Yerushalayim. That only applies to the Kachim. That which we said that the Amaratzim watch their things, their Kachim, so that they would be B'tahara and they'll be able to bring it to the Beis HaMikdash, that does not apply to the Galil because they can never get it to the Beis HaMikdash. But Truma doesn't have to go to the Beis HaMikdash. It's perfectly fine staying where it is. So the strip of land doesn't affect them, and therefore there's no reason that the Amaratzim shouldn't be trusted on the Truma when they're trusted, which is during the pressing season. So that couldn't be an explanation for why this brayso would argue. We have to go back to our original explanation. Okay, now the Gemara has some halachic questions over here. So the Mishnah had said that once the pressing season is over, you cannot give the Talmid Chacham, that is, the Amaretz, who doesn't keep Tahara, cannot give the Truma to a Talmid Chacham, because he won't be able to accept it, because they'll have to assume that it's Tamei. However, the Amaretz is allowed to save it for next year and give it in next year's pressing season. So Gemara asks, what if the Talmid Chacham already received it? He wasn't supposed to, but he received it from the Amaretz. Can he now wait till next year's pressing season and eat it then? Because the Amaretz can keep it the next year's pressing season and give it to him, and he's allowed to accept it even though he knows it's from last year. So what should be worse if the Kohen, Talmid Chacham, himself keeps it? Should be the same thing. In pressing season, it's allowed. So the Gemara asks, are you allowed to do that? So the Gemara answers, it should be easy to resolve that from a Mishnah which we learned about a Talmid Chacham and an Amaretz, who are two brothers, who inherited a farm from their father. Now, the halacha is that you're not allowed to sell produce of any sort to an Amaretz, for the simple reason that he's going to be metameid, and that was aser, and therefore by selling to him, you're violating the Isra of Lifnei Iver, you're making him violate an Avera. So you can't sell things to an Amaretz. Now, when two brothers divide in inheritance, so if they split each material equally, you get half the wheat and you get half the wheat, you get half the barley and you get half the barley, it's not considered like they exchanged their property. They each took half, and that was the half that originally fell to them at the moment that they inherited it, which is didn't divide it yet, but that was the half that fell to him all along, even before you divided. The division just shows which half fell to each one, so there's no exchange of property. If, however, they swap, and one says, I'll take all the wheat, you take all the barley, so that's not the way it fell to them. It fell to them half and half. So one is saying, I'll trade my wheat for your barley. That's a sale, and that would be a violation of selling from an Amaretz. That would be a violation of the Talmid Chacham selling to the Amaretz, because he's violating the halacha of Lifnei Iver. So now, we have a brayso that says that if a Talmid Chacham and an Amaretz inherit land together, and some of the wheat is tamei and some of it is tahar, or some of it is wet and therefore it's choshel gabel tuma, and some of it is not. So the Talmid Chacham could say, I'll take all the wet one, I'll take all the tahar ones, all the dry ones. You take all the wet ones because you don't care about hilchos tuma. Anyway, you're allowed to do that. That's called an equal split, and therefore it's not an exchange. I took half the wheat, you took half the wheat. I just took the ones that were dry, and that's what fell to me all along the entire time. That was the one that was mine from the moment of inheritance. Now, that brayso concludes and says that if, though, it's all wheat, the wheat is all tamei, and the barley is all tahar, so then they can't split it, and he'll say, I'll take all the barley, you take all the wheat, because like we said, that would be considered an exchange of property, and that's a sale which is not allowed. So you could potentially have a situation here where the Talmid Chacham inherits tamei stuff. So what should he do with it? So the Brisa concludes and it says he's allowed to burn it, meaning even if he gets benefit from the burning, even if it's oil and he burns it for light, he's allowed to do that. He's not allowed to eat it though. So Gemara asks, now why is he not allowed to eat it? Why doesn't he just save it for next year's pressing season? It says here he could burn the oil, save it for next year's pressing season, because we said oil you're allowed to have during pressing season. Obviously we see saving it for next year's pressing season would not help. So Gemara says, well, maybe we're talking about something here which doesn't have a season. Maybe we're not talking about oil. We're talking about some other thing that you're going to burn that has no season. So Gemara says, so then you should be able to save it for the regel. During the regel, all these things, right, during the 3 Yamim Tovim, Amaratzim are trusted then on all other things which don't have a pressing season. So Gemara says, no, it's not a proof also. We could be referring to something that will not keep to the regel. It'll spoil, and that's why he can't save it. But really, maybe my question is valid, and he should be able to save it. All right, now the Gemara goes into a different discussion, and the Gemara is ultimately going to circle back around to our Mishnah. This discussion is about a Beis HaPras. A Beis HaPras is a field that had grave in it, and it was plowed under, and the grave was broken up, and the bones were scattered all around the field. So the entire field now has the status of potentially having tumah in it. It could have a shard of bone in it, which is large enough to be metame if somebody moves it, if you move it with your foot or if you touch it. Now, if you just walk over it, it wouldn't be metame because a piece of a bone is not metame in OO by passing over, just by moving. So what can you do to get through this field? So the Gemara has a number of halachos and various masachtas about this. Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel discuss it at length. So the Mishnah says Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel both agree that you're allowed to do what's called a bedika. You're allowed to clear space for people who want to go bring a carbon Pesach, and they need to pass through this field in order to get there on time. However, if somebody wants to eat truma, he cannot walk through this field, even if you do a bedika, even if you clear it. What does clearing mean? So Rav Yehuda and the Mishmo says it means that he blows the dirt so that he can see where the bones are, and then he can walk through it wherever he doesn't see a bone. That's for carbon Pesach, but not for Truma. Chibar Abba says in the name of Ula, it means that if it was walked through by a lot of people, we assume that the bones were crushed. So to check it doesn't mean that we actually look for the bones. It means we check if it was walked a lot, and if a lot of people walk through it, then you can assume that there aren't any large enough pieces of the bones there to be a problem. So now, the Gemara has a question here. What happens if somebody checked the field and walked through it in order to be able to eat a carbon Pesach, which he was allowed to do? Is he allowed to eat a carbon truma? Is he allowed to eat truma? Because he was allowed to assume the field was tahor for carbon Pesach, could he now assume that it's tahor for truma as well? Now, the reason that there's a difference between Truma and Carbon Pesach is because Carbon Pesach, one has to bring its kares if one doesn't bring it. So the Rabbanan did not hold on to this Isser Beis HaPras if it's keeping one from bringing a Carbon Pesach. However, Truma goes the other way. If somebody was Tameh and eats Truma, that's Misa B'dei Shemayim. So in order to prevent that from happening, the Chachamim did create this rule of the Beis HaPras. So anyway, the question is, can he assume that he's a tahar for truma because he was allowed to assume it for the carbon Pesach that he brought? The Gemara says the halach is that it's a machlokes between Ula and his son, Ula and Rabba bar Ula. Ula says it's mutter since he is considered to be tahar for the carbon Pesach. It's considered to be tahar for the truma. Rabba bar Ula says it's not. You're not allowed to. Says the Gemara was an old man, Eliyahu Navi, usually, who says that there's a brisa that supports Ula, and that there's a Mishnah that supports Ula, and that's our Mishnah right here, because the Mishnah said that if the Amma Aretz, who at the time when he's not trusted on Truma, says that there's a revius of Kodesh, wine or oil mixed into the barrel, you could trust him, because if he's believed on the Kodesh, he's believed on the rest of the barrel as well. So that supports here also. If he's believed on the Carbon Pesach, it should also be supported and believed on the rest of the barrel as well. Okay, now the Gemara refers to the last line in the Mishnah, and the Gemara is going to explain what it means, and this will take us to our next Mishnah. So the last line in the Mishnah said that you have jugs of wine and oil that are intermingled. So the Mishnah said that you're trusted on them, the Amratzim are trusted on them, before the pressing season, 70 days. So now, the Gemara introduces the subject of the halacha of the barrel and the container or the jug itself. So Gemara quotes a brisa. The brisa says that Amratzim are not trusted on the jugs, not on the drugs, and not on truma. Just like our Mishnah says that they're trusted on kach, but not truma. This brisa adds they're not trusted on the jugs. The jugs themselves, they have to assume, are tamei, even if the Amratzim kept them as tahar. So Gemara says, what type of jugs are we talking about? We're talking about jugs of kachim, or talking about jugs of truma. If you're talking about jugs of kachim, they should be if they're trusted on the kachim, they should be trusted on the jugs. It had the kachim in it. And if you're talking about jugs of truma, well, of course they're not trusted. They're not trusted on the truma itself. Why should they be trusted on the jugs? So it says we're talking about jugs of kachim, and we're talking about jugs of truma at a time when they are trusted on the truma, which is during the pressing season. And what we mean is that they have to. We are trusting them that the actual material in the jugs is tahor, but not the jug itself. And therefore, when the kohen comes to take the truma or the kachim, it has to be poured from the jug into the kohen's jug, because the jug itself is considered to be tamei. We had a special reason to trust the amaretz on the karbanos, on the kachim. We don't have that on the jug itself, and therefore, even though it doesn't make sense, we do not give trustworthiness to the jug. Okay, so now the Gemara says this all doesn't fit with our Mishnah. Our Mishnah said if you have jugs mixed together, the Amaretz is neman on it. But you're telling me now that he's not neman at all, not even on the truma jugs. So certainly if it's mixed with other jugs, he shouldn't be trusted on any of it. So my answer is our Mishnah was referring to where regular jugs are mixed with kodesh jugs, not where they're mixed with truma jugs. And which is that can't be. The term that's used there is miduma'as. Miduma'as is from the word dimua, which means truma and chulin mixed together. It doesn't mean karbanos. Which is okay, we're referring to where somebody has tevel. Tevel is unseparated chulin, which is generally viewed as truma and chulin mixed together, and therefore the word midumas could be used there. And the person is planning on separating kachim from this tevel. Therefore he's watching it b'tahara. Therefore he's trusted. That's why it's called midumas. And he's trusted on it because it's used for karbanos. However, the jugs themselves for truma, he's not trusted. That is when they are full. The Gemara now has one last line on the Mishnah, and that is where it says that we're trusted 70 days before the pressing season. Says Abaye, we see from there that it's the responsibility of a sharecropper, the work on the land, to start preparing and keeping tahara on the wine presses and the olive presses 70 days before pressing season begins.